Hey guys, I was asked to re-upload a video of mine from 6 years ago. A guide to George R.R. Martin's Thousand Worlds. I actually get this request quite a bit as it's really the only guide to the Thousand Worlds out there. I mean, there's a pretty good Thousand Worlds wiki now, but nothing really exists that's concise. Now this video was originally taken down because I linked too many stories in it, so I won't do that here. I've also fixed some of the mistakes in the video. For example, there's 3 more stories. For the most part, this is a 6-year-old video when I didn't know very much about video editing. And of course, we did an entire Thousand Worlds book club after this video going through each story. But anyway, here's the old video dusted off with a few improvements. So I've talked quite a bit about George R.R. Martin's Thousand Worlds universe. And I do believe you can learn a hell of a lot about the Ice and Fire universe by reading the Thousand Worlds universe. It's chock filled with homages and familiar themes. And who knows, perhaps a Song of Ice and Fire takes place in this universe as well. In fact, I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to say it's impossible to read the Thousand Worlds and not have your perspective on a Song of Ice and Fire fundamentally change. And I mean fundamentally. It's that enlightening. Now, I know a lot of you would like to tackle the Thousand Worlds, but it's difficult. The stories don't advertise themselves as Thousand Worlds, and many of the stories are hard to find and out of print. Also, a lot of them are filled with a lot of confusing references in them. So to help everyone out, here is my guide to the history of the Thousand Worlds universe. From what I can gather, there are 24 stories in the Thousand Worlds universe. Okay, so actually, in the process of doing the Thousand Worlds book club, we ended up finding 3 more stories. And there's also an unfinished novel called Avalon sitting in George R.R. Martin's house. Below I've listed where you can find all 24 stories. And that's where this video ran into its problems. I think if you finish all 24, you get a free sandwich. Now 24 stories sounds like a lot, but it's actually around the length of a single Ice and Fire book. Additionally, we'll be reading them together. I'm going to be doing a video on each of these stories in order, so everyone will have a few weeks to read the story and then show up for the video. Yeah, I mean it took 2.5 years, but I did do a review of every single story. And then the comments section will be like a book club. Now, I've done a pretty thorough search, and this seems to be it. I was wrong, there was 27. Worship and With Morning Comes Mistfall were missed because their connection was really subtle. And The Runners was super obscure at the time, and I only found it because I ordered an old book. However, I may have missed some obscure story. If I have, please let me know. Now keep in mind, other George R.R. Martin stories may secretly take place in this universe, including A Song of Ice and Fire. So a Thousand Worlds book club fan did ask George R.R. Martin if A Song of Ice and Fire took place in the Thousand Worlds universe. George said that other authors have retconned their stories to all take place in the same universe, for example Isaac Asimov and Stephen King, but he has not done so with A Song of Ice and Fire. However, I should note that George did not say that A Song of Ice and Fire was not in a sci-fi universe. For example, it could be a medieval society on a post-apocalyptic world. It's just not in the Thousand Worlds universe. However, the 24 stories I've listed have clear references in them. They 100% take place in the Thousand Worlds universe. Well, except for maybe the 3 corpse handler stories. They mention Thousand World locations, but George has said they might be a different continuity. So the history of the Thousand Worlds universe begins with Earth, which is referred to as Old Earth. Humanity began to expand and started settling worlds like New Holm, and Balder, and Thor, and Old Poseidon. It's during this period that the story When Morning Comes Mistfall takes place on the world of New Refuge. And there were countless more. A federal empire was formed. The creation of the empire did involve subjugating planets, and during this subjugation was the Electo incident. A ship with artificial intelligence went rogue, which caused humanity to move away from AI. The Electo incident is the plot of Worship. And they set up a military training base on the heavy gravity world of Wellington. Now the Federal Empire was surrounded by 2 hive-minded alien races. Towards the galactic core were the Findi, and away from the galactic core towards the galactic edge were the Harangans. Humans are humans, of course, and they started settling worlds in Harangan space. This included Avalon, Jameson's world, Bastion, and Prometheus. And so war began. The Federal Empire went to war with the Findi and the Harangans simultaneously in something called the Double War. The war lasted 1,000 years and essentially destroyed all 3 empires. The Harangans were the especially difficult foe, as they would nuke planets, utilize slave races, and telepathically send visions to humanity to encourage them to do stupid things. Now only 2 stories actually take place during the Double War. The first is called The Hero, which is our author's first published piece. It takes place on the Harangan front and involves a soldier from Wellington who has finished his service and wants to visit Old Earth. The second story is Men of Greywater Station. It deals with military scientists manning a biowar facility on the Findi front, and they're dealing with a hostile, hive-minded fungus. Greywater Watch seems to be named after this story. Now, biowar is humanity's weapon against the Findi and the Harangans. The Federal Empire establishes Earth's Ecological Engineering Corps on Prometheus. Its symbol was a golden theta, which comes up a bit. And it appeared quite a bit in Game of Thrones as well, but we got no explanation on that. The Corps was able to create incredible biowar spaceships to spread horror throughout the galaxy. You name it, they could create it. Birdmen, incurable viruses, dinosaurs, battle worms. Now the Harangan and Findi empires collapse. Another hive-minded race called the Damush come in and destroy the Findi Empire, although the Findi themselves do survive as a race. The Harangans, though, suffer near genocide. Their slave races turn on them, and they go into hiding on Old Haranga, under the earth, waiting. Harangan space becomes known as the Jambles because it's a mix-up of cultures. The Federal Empire collapses as well. There's a revolt on Thor, and New Holm secedes, followed by the other colonies. One of the Federal fleets, the 15th, is completely destroyed. Old Earth then recalls a very famous general named Stephen Cobalt Northstar. Northstar rebels as well and destroys Wellington. Old Earth goes into full panic mode and requests the 17th Fleet from Avalon to return to Earth to defend it. However, its general, named Tober, decides to run away and heads to a region called the Vale and founds a planet there called Tober in the Vale. Old Earth, without the firepower to defend its empire, takes its remaining ships and goes into isolation, where it remains. Except rare exceptions, no one goes to Old Earth. The rest of the Federal Empire falls into civil war and chaos. The entire Federal Empire, except for Old Earth, Balder, New Holm, and Avalon, fall into a dark age. All human worlds except for those four lose spaceflight for roughly a generation. This period is called the Interregnum. Some worlds stayed in their dark ages for hundreds of years or never left them. George R.R. Martin has at least 2 stories that take place on unknown interregnum worlds at unknown times. They are Bitter Blooms, which takes place on a medieval world with uneven seasons like Planetos, and there's In the House of the Worm, which takes place on a slowly freezing medieval world where Earth's Ecological Engineering Corps had a presence. The subterranean fireworms of Valyria seem to be borrowed from this story. The technology of Earth's Ecological Engineering Corps was the pinnacle of human civilization, and surpassed everything seen since. Centuries have passed and nothing comes close to what they were able to do. Only one of their biowar spaceships survives, and it's discovered orbiting an old Harangan slave world by a man named Haviland Tuff. Haviland Tuff, with a D on the end of Haviland. Tuff decides to travel through the galaxy as an ecological engineer for hire. Tuff and his biowar seed ship have 7 adventures: the Plague Star, Loaves and Fishes, Guardians, Second Helpings, A Beast for Norn, Call Him Moses, and Manna from Heaven. Now, although their technology never gets back to core levels, the Prometheans are still obsessed with genetics. They alter themselves to give themselves long lives, extra strength, and sometimes even wings or gills or all sorts of other crazy combinations. The story Star Lady takes place on a Promethean planet called This Rock, and it includes a mystical Valyrian-like boy called Golden Boy. The story Night Flyers takes place in deep space, but one of the protagonists is an altered Promethean. The story is about a crew tracking a strange, ancient, spacefaring alien called the Vulcran. Now, as I mentioned before, Prometheus is in what was Harangan space. The area is now called the Jambles because after the fall of the Harangans and the Interregnum, all sorts of different weird cultures have developed and are now dealing with each other with the resumption of spaceflight. Quite a few stories take place in the Jambles, including Avalon, which was the aborted novel by our author that he thinks he'll never get back to. There is also this Tower of Ashes, which takes place on Jameson's world. The population of this planet come from Old Poseidon and live on small islands on the planet. Oh, and The Runners takes place on that original planet, Old Poseidon, though we don't know when. The planet's main continent is largely unexplored, and our heartbroken protagonist heads off there to live. Interestingly, the people from Jameson's world are called Jamies. And 7 Times Never Kill Man takes place on the planet Corlos, but involves a religious group called the Steel Angels of Bastion. The human Harangan War was pretty harsh on Bastion, and from that came a militaristic, ever-expanding religion called the Steel Angels. One of the gods in the House of Black and White is the Pale Child, which is the Steel Angels' god. Additionally, the broken pyramids and monkeys that Victarion finds on the Isle of Cedars is a clear reference to this story. Religion is a big part of the Thousand Worlds universe, and there is this religion that we keep hearing about that worships a woman named Erica Storm Jones. She died and came back, but we don't really know much about it except that it involved cloning. However, Catholicism is still a big thing, and the Catholic Church of the Thousand Worlds will send out men to make sure that their churches are teaching the faith correctly. And this is the plot of The Way of Cross and Dragon, which is about an inquisitor visiting the world of Arion and dealing with an alien conspiracy called the Liars. So beyond the gas cloud known as the Veil is the Fringe, the outermost worlds of the galaxy. Now weirdly in the Fringe, there is a collection of 6 stars orbiting a giant red star. Now this star formation is called the Wheel of Fire, and it's very unlikely. And so there's lots of legends and rumors that it was created by an ancient alien race. Now the Wheel of Fire would be an incredible tourist attraction, except it doesn't have any worlds orbiting it. That is, until the rogue planet of Warlorn began to move towards it. Everyone in the area decided to establish cities on Warlorn for a decade-long festival, and so a massive number of tourists came to enjoy the festival and observe the Wheel of Fire. The festival eventually ended, and the planet began to drift away from the stars off into eternal night. The only people left on the planet are a few religious extremists from the planet High Cavalon. And this is the setting of the novella Dying of the Light. Now the farthest world out in the galaxy is Dark Dawn, home of the Darklings. This of course reminds me of the Darklands of Duskendale. The Darklings are nihilist, but among them are the famous composer Lamia Baylis and the famous explorer Tomo. Tomo teamed up with the Promethean Walberg and decided to go from the end of the galaxy inward. And so every world in the Man Realm has a story of Tomo and Walberg visiting them, true or not. Some people think that because Walberg was an altered Promethean, he's still alive and still traveling. Explorers and their legends are a big part of the Thousand Worlds culture. We hear about the legendary Celia Marsayan and the incredible Clarinamas. Clarinamas was a war hero in the Human-Harengan War who eventually got old and was put in cryosleep on Avalon. When Tober ran off to the Vale with the 17th Fleet, Avalon was left defenseless. So they revived some ancient spaceships from the 5th Fleet and needed every body available to repair and man them. So Clarinamas was pulled out of cryosleep to lend a hand. Later, when things calmed down, Clarinamas took some ships from the 5th Fleet and went on an exploration mission around the Man Realm. Centuries later, in the Glass Flower, a cyborg claiming to be Clarinamas shows up on the planet Croan-Deheni, over on the Findi side of space. The cyborg is looking to play a body-swapping game. Explorers like Tomo, Walberg, Celia, and Clarinamas are an inspiration for the protagonist in The Stone City. It's about a man who travels past Findi space to a planet called Greyrest in Damoosh space.
Actually, Greyrest is further in, past Damoosh space.
And he wants to keep going further in. He wants to travel past the Nor Talush, past the Linkalers, past the Ath. Incidentally, House Uller of Hellholt, that's Ilaria Sand's house, is in reference to this story. The protagonist's name is Holt, and he's exploring an Uller civilization. Now, in the Thousand Worlds universe, dead bodies can be controlled by telepaths and used for labor. Now, this is illegal on most worlds, but there are some out-of-the-way corpse planets where this goes on. And this is the setting of some of George R.R. Martin's darkest work, the Corpse Handler trilogy. Nobody Leaves New Pittsburgh, Override, and Meathouse Man. The final 2 stories are the most well-regarded of George R.R. Martin's Thousand Worlds. There's Sand Kings, which takes place in the center of the Man Realm on Balder. It's about a man who searches for exotic pets for fighting. And then there's A Song for Leah, which is about humans converting to an alien religion on the planet of Shkeen. It stars Robin Liana. And we made it. We got through all 24. So I encourage everyone to read The Hero. It's a short one, so no one really has any excuse. And in our next Thousand Worlds video, we'll be talking about it. See you then.